Hi, good evening. My name's Sean O'Toole. I'm going to be hosting this evening's talk. I'm doing it from my bedroom, but I'm speaking to many people. I suppose for everyone, it's a rather strange period. I'm going to dispense with introductions. I'm presuming, well, can you see me at least? No.
Well, I think your camera's just turned off.
No, it just says the connection's low. Anyway, I'm going to speak. You don't need to necessarily see me. I'm going to dispense with introductions and jump straight in because I think it's a question, today's topic, that is both urgent and pressing. But, my aim is to handle it in a way that is light and candid, but without sacrificing some of the urgency. So we have 3 participants. One in Johannesburg, one in Cape Town, and one in Gaborone. I can't see them, but I'm sure you can. So there's Lerato, Julie, and Charl. So it's a question I'm going to put to all 3 of you immediately. We're 6 months into the big disease with a little name, as Prince might have called it. How has the COVID crisis affected how you work? And I suppose in answering, you could also elaborate on how things worked before the 6 months. So, Julie, would you like to go?
Sure. Thanks so much, Sean, and thanks to everyone who's joining us tonight and to my fellow panelists. I think the story of Guns and Rain is quite interesting in terms of what's happened this year, because we were one of the first online-only galleries on the continent. We started at the end of 2013, early 2014, and we actually only assumed a physical space 2 and a bit years ago. And before that, we sort of did pop-up events in different places. And I do remember on, I think, more than one occasion being rejected from an art fair because we didn't have a physical space. So how the tables have turned.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for us, it was obviously there've been tremendous changes this year, but in terms of how the gallery operates, we, because of our history of having been online kind of from the start, the prospect of taking everything online was not particularly daunting, and we were able to kind of adjust and move quite fast and be quite nimble. So that was definitely helpful. But of course, I think at the heart of everything that we are doing is the artists and the artists' welfare. And so obviously how we support the artists has had to change, quite a bit. And I think we'll talk a bit about that later in the conversation. But in a nutshell, yes, I think whilst there have been lots of challenges in the art world in general this year, we've been quite well positioned to handle those big changes.
Well, would you say, before I go to Lerato, Charl, would you say that's partly because you'd already embarked on, and I hate to use a kind of set phrase, but a digital journey?
Yeah, absolutely.
Into what you were doing. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a strong kind of digital presence from the beginning, and right from the start, I've always believed in the power of online to make things happen in terms of art. And whilst I'm not saying that it's, the solution for everything, absolutely not, because we all know that art is such a tactile, subjective, emotional, experiential thing, that obviously digital has very clear limitations. But I've always believed in the power of the web and what it can do for artists and the art world in general.
Okay. Lerato, I want to go to you and pose the same question. Maybe you could just give a little context of your business first and how the tsunami of COVID has influenced things.
Thank you so much, Sean, and thank you to my fellow panelists and everybody else who's joined us. Loapi is a consultancy and a project space that we act as a conduit between capital markets and artists in Botswana and other African countries as well. By merging and exploiting that cyclical relationship between academia, private sector and public sector. So we say we facilitate the merging of different international entities and then funnel them into the Botswana market in an effort to maximize best practices in the furtherance of the arts in the creative economy. For example, a week for me includes liaising with the Harvard Center for African Studies and connecting with entities that I feel like align with their mandate. 2 years ago, they opened a satellite branch in Johannesburg, and we've been instrumental in their partnership with local entities as they seek to spearhead what they call an African Renaissance in the creative sphere. We also completed 2 projects with the Botswana satellite of British Council, which is also trying to expand its reach in Africa as a whole with the regional bodies. So British Council now is British Council Southern Africa Arts, West Africa Arts, and East Africa Arts. We're the wellspring of OWLIT in Botswana. OWLIT is a 2-year-old AI creative education platform which extends its reach from the USA to China. One of our key clients is Cloud Valley School, which was famously started, founded by Jack Ma. We completed a pilot program this week in Botswana. I also work intimately with individual artists of very differing tiers. We've also developed the Loapi development program where we nurture local artists through various collaborations until they are market ready. So as somebody who is emphatic about pursuing best practices, for me, it was commonsensical that our daily operations be rooted in hybrid models, hybrid contextualized models, and technology. So for me, as a multi-tiered project space, fairs like Turbine and others are a natural space to be because it's the perfect intersection of all these worlds that I cater to, very many worlds. The private sector, the public sector, consumer, practitioner, all get to sort of coalesce in one space.
So can I interrupt you, Lerato? Your job sounds like it involves a lot of encounter with people, partly through the digital realm, but physical meetings. How has the lockdown affected those abilities?
Right. So my focus during any crisis, especially now, has been how we can minimize the impact of the crisis while maximizing efficiency in tending to that crisis. And COVID is no different. So I can't speak of anybody else in any other country. We've had 6 deaths and over 400 active cases that are asymptomatic. So, I mean, that is 6 too many, but it's a remarkable figure relative to what's happening around the world. So as a country, we've been able to circumvent the need to divert enormous resources to fighting COVID at a scale that is happening in other countries. Since the initiation of extreme social distancing, which is what our leaders would prefer to call it as opposed to a lockdown, the cracks that were already there in traditional models, those cracks have just gone wider and some have completely collapsed. So
you're preempting a question I'll ask a little later. We're still in introductory mode. Charl, you have a very different business. You started out as a bricks and mortar gallery, and you've been a fixture of many fairs in South Africa for the past decade. So you have a very different experience of the past 6 months. Go ahead.
Well, Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, same with as Judy just said, we've always been geared to use all these other tools that we've started using more now. And so what we've done now was really just more of an extension of everything that has happened before. But what we did do different now was maybe just the nuance was different. Instead of selling to a client in a sort of way where you introduce artists, etc., we would now tell them the artist stories, and we would do little things different, just because we knew people had more, were going to spend more time on their devices. So we stayed out of the inboxes, but we tried to give them more information. So yeah, we didn't. I mean, I miss art fairs. Obviously, that's another topic. I think we'll get to that later too. But just for the immediate. As it is right now, it was all about retuning and calibrating everything you do and just doing it as good as you can.
Did you, you've still kept your current gallery on Church Street in Cape Town? You're not moving?
No, it's a good question, that, because I mean, we're on the ground floor of a busy street. It's a retail space. And that comes at a price or at a cost. And I have been wondering, what if I would move to the first floor of a building around the corner, say, and pay half the rent for twice the space or twice the size. So it is something that I am thinking about, actually. Also, if you take into consideration, it seems that a lot of the people, 10 years ago, I'd be sitting here at the gallery waiting for people to walk in. Now, maybe 1 out of 100 people that visit the gallery come here totally by accident. What happens usually is they come really informed. They've done their homework, they've browsed around, they know the artists, and they come with a mission. And with that being the case, yes, maybe it is time to look at a different kind of space. Maybe not so much a gallery in the traditional sense of the word, but a viewing room, That sort of thinking is beginning to surface.
Julie, I want to put a question to you. You're shaking your head there in agreement, and you came to the art world with an interesting background. You studied anthropology, but you also worked at Google in the communications. And as you said, you started an online business as opposed to going the brick and mortar route. Can you talk a bit about those different sets of themes in your professional biography, how they've sort of fed into what you're doing presently?
Sure. Yes, so my background is in anthropology and development studies, with a sort of strong emphasis on history and politics in Southern Africa. And I did end up at Google for quite a long time, working in communications, as you mentioned. That was a job which sort of started by accident, and then I ended up staying a long time, and it was extremely interesting work, and also a lot of sort of social and economic and educational development work across the continent, contrary to what people believe about some of the big tech players. It's not all about trying to make money all the time. And yes, then I decided to quit that job and move into the arts, and I'd had a long-standing interest in art anyway, sort of throughout my life, in different, taking different forms over the years. But the amazing thing about starting Guns N' Rain was that it allowed me to bring together all of these different interests under one roof. So my interests in history and politics, my interest and experience in the tech world, and the time that I spent at Google was certainly a time that sort of evangelized me to the benefits of technology. Although, of course, we're all aware of the pitfalls and some of the dangers of it. And then, yes, of course, it also allowed me to think about ways to try and serve the greater community, artists in particular. And my vision from the beginning was really to take a regional approach. And that was something that I felt was missing in South Africa at that time. Bear in mind that I was still relatively new to South Africa. I've only been here for 10 10 years.
Mhm.
And what I felt was that South African art lovers and South African art fairs tended to, from what I saw at that time, tended to have very little knowledge about what was happening in countries elsewhere on the continent. So that's changed a lot in the last 6 years, which is great, and that's due to the efforts of many people in the art space here, and including Turbine, who've got exhibitors from several different countries this year and have over the past years as well. So yes, I think I saw a gap to try and take a more regional approach, and especially to support artists from neighboring countries where there has historically been very little support for them. So that includes Namibia, Botswana a little bit, Mozambique, Swaziland, Eswatini, and Zimbabwe as well, although now Zimbabwe is much better supported and represented thanks to multiple different players and colleagues.
Okay. I have a
So I
question.
think that answers some of your questions.
I have a question I want to put to all of you. It's a very succinct question, but it's a bridge that builds on what Julie's speaking about. So please, if you could just address it by the numeral. How many staff do you have? So I'll start with Lerato.
Staff, we've got 2.
2. Okay. Julie?
I have one part-time assistant and occasional interns.
Okay. And Charl?
1 as well.
Okay. I mean, I think this is one of the reasons that I was looking forward to today's talk, in that we essentially in the realm of, it's a very particular area of the art world, the independent dealer or entrepreneur starting out and growing over time. Lerato, I read an interview that you gave in 2016. It was just as you were starting out at the Harvard Graduate School. And it was a very optimistic interview in the sense that the interviewer asked you about what happens after. And your response was scale, scale, scale. It is one of the biggest challenges as a company, scaling up. So I want to, particularly in this year of the COVID, there's partly a defensiveness. Some businesses have even closed. I mean, Charl's neighbor, Smith's gallery, is closed. So it's maybe not a year to be speaking of scaling up. But at the same time, if one looks at the art economy story over a longer period, smaller players have been endangered. It's been a very difficult time for small galleries, particularly through the process, I suppose, of art fairs. There's been a consolidation, and galleries have to scale up and have physical presence. So you have the mega galleries that are in Asia, Europe, North America. One sees with the larger galleries in South Africa, not only do they have a footprint now in South Africa, but they have an outpost somewhere else. So taking into account, we're talking in the year of COVID, but scale, scale, scale. So since you gave me the word, Lerato, we'll put it to you first. I'll allow the other two to think. Has it been a year still where you've been scaling, or have you had to kind of put on pause ambition?
It's quite interesting. I'm also in the process of learning since we're quite young, but I remember living in the US and liaising with different dealers in different parts of the world, and they would have the most incredible programs, the most incredible artists, and then you'd go to London and it's just a hole in the wall with 2 people, So the idea of scale is quite a fascinating one for me. It obviously needs to be contextualized for the worlds in which we live in. Some people are not necessarily interested in scaling and being a mega gallery. I'm playing in a very small way in developing the artists that I feel like need to be developed. If they go on to sign to bigger galleries, absolutely incredible. It's beautiful sort of working with spaces like Turbine and up and coming fairs where they're looking to contextualize their fairs and they're looking to be more inclusive by saying, okay, Lerato, this is where you are. We would love to work with you to get here. And we know to get here, you need access to markets. And Joburg is a huge market. Nigeria is a big market. Let's help you get to there. But these are the stipulations that we have for now. It's interesting for an upcoming fair that the bigger galleries are going to be paying for the space and it's free for us. So the smaller players. So those sort of fluid models have been interesting in us smaller players saying, here we are. And then for me, like I said, focusing just on selling art has not been conducive enough in terms of scaling. If I just focused on art, we would have been closed by now. So it's those hybrid models that had allowed me to then channel capital into other areas where I can scale within my context, which is a little bit lower than maybe other players.
Different,
so,
not lower. Different.
Yeah, very different.
Julie, is scaling an ambition, or are you happy as?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and particularly this year, and of course for young galleries, it's a continuous question of, you know, how do you get to the next level? Do you want to get to the next level? How do you take those very risky decisions? Because it is very risky. Lerato has just said, you know, if she focused just on selling art, she would have closed by now. And the reality is that, you know, we've all been there where we think, wow, like maybe this art fair is going to be my last because it's so expensive and I have no idea how it's going to go. Look, I think what's been interesting this year is that, and in fact, it's not just this year. We've seen what's been happening the last, let's say, over the 2 years. You know, a lot of mid-sized galleries internationally have closed. A lot of mid-sized galleries in London and New York have closed. They couldn't afford retail space in the areas where they should be, you know, to be able to make sales. And what we've seen is this polarization in the gallery world, where you've got your mega players and then you've got your tiny, more nimble players. And I do think that the small, nimble players have a good chance of succeeding this year now, especially. Like, you know, we've had to be so streamlined and budget conscious and innovative in order to survive this long and to get this far, that I think we're quite well positioned to make it through to the other side. I'm also seeing quite a lot of new players enter the market at the moment. So quite a lot of new dealers, new young dealers, which is interesting and exciting. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out over the coming year. I don't know what Charl's seen, but yeah, I'm quite happy with being small and nimble at the moment. Next year might change, I don't know.
Charl, scaling?
Yeah, I agree with Julie. I think being small is such an advantage at the moment. You know, there were other things we had to do too when the virus or the whole thing started, and that was look at your expenses, obviously, and renegotiate your rent. And I got some funding for my assistant's salary. You know, those are little things. I think that was relatively easy to pursue that and survive. The other thing, of course, it's very personal. You know, I really enjoy having a small setup where I micromanage almost everything, and I have a certain kind of relationship with the artists and with my clients and so on. So for me, that's probably how it will be. And I think, as we just said, yeah, that's probably the safest way for the future.
So I'm going to draw in a question from one of the viewers. I haven't defined scaling. Fair enough. And I'm not going to define it. I'm going to ask the three of you what scaling up means, because fairly, Lavinia says it could mean you're scaling up your impact, you're scaling up your network. It's not necessarily just bigger premises with more staff. What does scaling up mean to you in this year, Lerato?
Oh, goodness. Scaling for me means focusing specifically, and I know this sounds very capitalistic, but on collectors. In Botswana, we have an exhibition culture that is quite strong, and the exhibition culture is not necessarily tied to finding collectors. It's more about deepening inquiries that artists have. So for me, the exercises that I have been doing, again, is according to access to those capital markets in the diaspora, in order for artists to then make an economic argument for the activities that they're doing. So the practices there, the inquiries there, this beautiful textual work that's happening, but what's the point of doing it all if we're not going to sell? Cash is king. So for me, it really has been about scaling the collector population, growing it, and to be much more inclusive through technology of collectors in the diaspora. As we've seen in Turbines, 50% of our sales, granted we only have 4 works, are from people in Germany. And that has been wonderful. That has never happened before. So I'm more focused on scaling, of growing the collector base so that works can be channeled to other collectors around the world.
If I could jump to Charl and pose the same question, but just to offer the viewers a little history. In Johannesburg, there was a reorganization of fairs last year, shall we say, and as a result, smaller galleries were uninvited from its new iteration, which I'm trying to be politic here and just toe a neutral line. As a result, Charl, you attended an art fair in Australia, am I correct? And
yeah, that's right.
In a sense, I think there's often in the trade, particularly in contemporary African art, there's a tendency to tick off a set list of venues that you would like to exhibit at or have exhibited at. And you just went completely left turn. Can you speak a bit about that experience in the context of scaling up networks, etc.?
Yeah, look, for me, scaling really means increasing the footprint of the artist. The more people, a wider audience basically, that get to know about their work. And obviously, as a commercial gallery, that is a strategy to generate more sales. Now, when the Joburg Art Fair thing happened, what I did is I just thought, look, there must be other opportunities. And I actually happened to know about the one in Sydney, the Sydney Contemporary, it's called. And I couldn't do it in previous years because of the Joburg Art Fair. So it forced me to go there and do that. And as an experience, it was interesting in a positive way. It was great. Australia, for me, never really... It's not a place I ever thought I would want to visit, but it was interesting to do that. It was interesting to see how they operated. They were very efficient, by the way. Also, I did not sell to South Africans only. It was good for me to see how my artists, or the artists that I work with, how the market there resonate with them or appreciate it. It was a very positive sign, and obviously it gave me more confidence for the future in doing other art fairs. So, yeah, all good on that side.
Julie, if you could pick up on that, one of the real world issues of attending physical art fairs is logistics, travel and transfer, particularly of work. Could you speak a bit about that and this year, where I presume you've had to look at forms of online sale?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I think as a young gallery, the logistics and the expense of attending international fairs is epic. It's very, very daunting. It is very risky. I've done quite a few anyway, but it is, it can be very, very stressful. So in some ways, it's been a relief not to have to do a lot of traveling to fairs this year. we are actually participating in a fair in London in October, and at this stage, you know, I'm not going. So the artworks will go without me, and you know, I'm assembling a sort of a substitute team on the ground. So that's going to be interesting. And again, it's going to be a new sort of hybrid experience, because I'll be there. I just won't be there in the booth. I'll be on a screen somewhere. So yes, selling online. I think it's actually gone remarkably well this year. I think obviously it does take years to build a network of collectors and followers, and especially those who will come back and keep coming back. But I've also been heartened this year, since the start of the pandemic, that we've met quite a lot of new collectors online, and that's been fantastic, because again, for a young gallery, you need to be meeting new people all the time, because realistically, even if a person does have disposable income, they're probably only going to be buying maybe one artwork every year, or maybe one artwork every 2 years. You know, that's for lots of people, that's as far as the budget goes. So the sooner you meet them, the sooner the year goes past and they come back to buy something else. But it really takes years to get that pipeline going. And so that's why, you know, you can make a huge outlay at a fair, and you meet the people. They don't buy anything at the fair, but they might buy something 9 to 12 months later. And, you know, whether your business can survive during that time is the question. But yeah, going back to this year, I've been very heartened by sales. It's been going very well. And I think it's also a reflection of the fact that we've been internationally oriented right from the start. And I've spent a lot of time and effort on my communications with international audiences right from the start. So I think just having a foot in multiple countries, multiple doors, we're not reliant just on South Africa. We're not reliant just on the US or the UK. We've got a wide network, and that's proven very valuable.
I want to take an expression that Charl used, which was staying out of the collector's inbox. And I thought it was a nice expression, because I guess there has been a deluge of kind of communication. So how do you, in a time of lockdown, stay in touch with your clients, your collectors? I presume you don't stalk them on social media. What are the creative strategies that you use? I mean, what digital tools are your go-to tools every day? So, Lerato.
So interesting. I was speaking to a good colleague of mine. She started the Mauritius Art Fair, International Art Fair, that's happening in October. And we've had to go back to the old models of just picking up the phone and calling. Like literally calling people, and every single country. It's interesting with Southern Africa, and speaking to my colleagues in Eswatini, Zimbabwe, the cultural aspect, Sean, is so important. So it's not like New York or some parts of South Africa where you can walk into a gallery and walk out and you sold a piece. No, I have to, you know, there are cultural things that you have to respect. Intergenerational mingling, wining and dining in some sort of way, not just, oh, buy this piece, walk into the White Cube and buy a piece. No, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And it's interesting when we're opening businesses or when you're operating within different countries that the cultural education becomes really, really fundamental. You can't just come into Botswana and set up a gallery and think you're going to sell works. No. So those are things that we've had to be cognizant of, and yeah, it's yeah.
So my question though was, what are your go-to digital tools? You weren't using a digital telephone. What are you finding that you're using sort of during the week? Are you on Zoom a lot? Are you?
Yeah, I've always been somebody who's technically savvy. So two of my favorite apps are Bleeper, which is much more personal to me, and I've introduced it to my father. So Bleeper is an app that you just literally download it, you point at anything anything and you click for 5 seconds and it shows you all sorts of information from the internet on that particular artwork or flower or whatever it is. Zoom as well has been something that I've been using quite extensively. But to be very honest with you, we haven't quite gotten to that digital space yet in my country. And again, it's still telephone, it's still WhatsApp, it's still
Good old faithful.
Yeah, it's still getting on and calling Germany and saying, hey, can you check this out online, this fair? That's what we've been using.
Charl, how about you?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the old faithful, you know, it's just maybe if you have a certain feeling about when would be a good time to call a certain person. Or look, one of the things that we did do is we, the artists that I work with, a lot of interesting new projects were launched by them, and I had something to say or offer when I engage with my clients. So yeah, and so that was the way. But otherwise, it was your Instagrams, and which is an important one. But
did you find that social media has traction, as in that there's interest that maybe starts a conversation that could, like Julie says, develop into something down the line?
It does. You know, it's very hard to measure. Sometimes, again, you know, it doesn't necessarily result in the sale right now, but people see what you're busy doing and they notice things, and maybe only a month later they would get back to you about something, or once they've seen enough to feel confident about inquiring. So it works, but it's not as immediate as the medium.
So maybe just to be very direct, in comparison, and it's probably an unfair one, but it's the topic that we're chatting about. You have a very beautiful gallery with a lot of foot traffic. And you've told me before, people have walked by, seen a work and come and inquired. How is that different to social media? That kind of, because social media, to a degree, Instagram, particularly if one's using it in a quasi-dealer fashion, is a shop display window. How is the transaction or the exchange different?
Well, what would typically happen is they would contact you and they would arrange to meet you and come and have a look at the work. So I would imagine the essence of the answer is both of you are more prepared. So it's a more fruitful conversation that takes place. And the results reflect that.
Okay. Julie?
Yeah, I think I agree with Charl. Instagram, Facebook, they are sort of shop windows to a degree. My experience is that people will always want to ask questions. There's always going to be quite a lot of back and forth about not only the artwork, but the process of shipping and how to pay for it and so on. And it's quite a lengthy transaction or series of transactions at the end of the day. It's not something that happens quickly, and often artists don't realize that sometimes it'll take 40 emails back and forth before a work sells, or 40 WhatsApp messages. So it's often not instantaneous, and it can take time. In terms of apps, yeah, I think probably the same as most other people, Instagram, WhatsApp. And we've been using Instagram Live for studio visits, and that's been really interesting as an educational tool. In general, I don't think it's something which is driving sales, but I do think that collectors are keen to make a studio visit, even if it's online, and that just gives them a better sense about who the artist is, what they're up to, and even if they don't buy something right away, it's about helping them learn about the art and the artist. So, you know, those virtual studio visits are great, whether that happens over Instagram Live or whether it happens over WhatsApp. I mean, I've also done some virtual gallery visits on WhatsApp for someone sitting in another city or another country, and I sort of literally walk them around the gallery, and we've taken works up and down and put different works together to show them what this pair will look like or that pair will look like, and that's been successful. It hasn't been happening a lot, but that is is feasible, and that's something which is a bit new because of COVID. It's quite fun.
A lot of we're now into 40 minutes. The talk has been very public facing in the sense that it responds very much to what the Turbine Art Fair does, which is create a conversation about art and artists, but through dealers speaking to a public, typically collectors and art interested people. But there's other relationships. Dealers or intermediaries such as yourself also have very personal relationships with artists. And I'm sure they must have somehow, they would have a different inflection in this year. Can you speak a bit about how, particularly in the COVID year, you've looked and understood your artists differently? I think Julie sort of preempted a little bit by mentioning Instagram Live. I saw, for instance, William Kentridge speak from his studio on Instagram Live. And you've very much telegraphed into the artist's studio, as opposed to going to a convention center and seeing an artist seated on stage. But can you talk a bit about your relationships with your stables of artists and during this period? Charl, let's go there.
Yeah, I think interestingly enough, we actually communicated more during the past few months than we did before. And it was really conversations about strategy and how can we do this and how can we do that and how are you and all that. So that definitely happened. The artists often also, they couldn't get to their studios during the first month or two, so they had to work at home. And some of the artists that I work with, they work in large formats, so they had to change what they do. And that in itself was a conversation that we had all the time, how about this, how about that? So that's what we did, and that's how that relationship turned out in the end. Julie was mentioning it earlier about mental well-being and so on. I don't know, maybe I'm thick-skinned or so, I don't know, but everybody seemed okay to me. It was new territory and there was excitement about trying new things, and that's essentially what this was like.
Lerato, you deal, as part of your boutique agency's, I suppose, 360-degree offering, you also work one-on-one with certain artists. Not in a strictly dealership capacity, it's slightly expanded. So one of the artists is Nelson Makama, right? So could you pick up from there?
Yeah, you work with different artists of different net worths. Our artists in Botswana are at the developmental stage, well, the ones that we work with at Loapi. So in terms of working with them during the lockdown, we always carried on what we've been doing because we are small. So the conversations every single day, trying to film during a lockdown, trying to do the logistics during a lockdown. The other artists that I work with, two of them, Victor Ahikemono and Nelson Makama, they're based in South Africa and they're based in Nigeria. And the models haven't really shifted. Like I said, in terms of being a company that was already incorporating tech, nothing really changed in the models that we were using. If anything, the principals that I've been working with, their operations slowed down. There was very minimal traveling, and we're able to actually have conversations that we've been meaning to either developing project spaces. Nelson is doing a beautiful project space called Botu Project Space, which is artists creating a gallery space for other artists.
In Johannesburg?
Johannesburg, and it's really, really beautiful. So he'll talk more about that in the next few months. It's really, really an incredible space. So we've been seeing, I was watching a chat the other day where Ibrahim Muhammad just said he hasn't sat still his entire life, and what COVID allowed for him to do was to really just pause and reflect and focus on the things that he really wants to build. So it's beautiful working again with these two high net worth artists in terms of funneling that capital into other projects that then Loapi developmental artists can also plug into them, be it an artist in residency or but to project space, which is a gallery space, and many other things. So it's been wonderful time to just sit and reflect and focus on what's really important for those artists, and then being on the phone call, once a week, every single day, whatever it is, to discuss those plans further.
Julie?
Yeah, so I think it's been, everyone's had different experiences. And of course, we're working with artists across multiple countries, and we've all had different types of lockdowns at different times, and different types of restrictions, different types of impact. So it's been very varied. What we started straight away when the hard lockdown began was a kind of a weekly check-in meeting for anyone who wanted to join. And that was just to sort of foster a sense of community for people who might be feeling isolated. As Charl said, artists couldn't get to their studios. And for those who work at, collectives or places where there are multiple other artists working, they did, experience quite a lot of isolation. So yeah, we tried to implement some weekly activities where we could just chat about what was going on for all of us, and stay in touch. And
could I ask about a particular artist in your stable?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Could I ask about a particular artist in your stable, Mongezi Nkapaye? He had probably one of the most fantastic works on the Stellenbosch Triennial or Triennale that was launched this year. It was unfortunately a victim of COVID in that it had to prematurely close down. So the reason I ask is that the artist appears on an important curated exhibition, and there's attention, and suddenly the COVID interferes, if that's the correct way of phrasing it. Were there instances of this where we've spoken of some of the, let's say, transitions that have been effortless, but where also COVID has nipped opportunities or curtailed them or clamped down on them? Julie?
Yeah, certainly. I think there have been obviously some disappointments for some artists where events have been cancelled or postponed. I think for most of our artists, thankfully, the events have been postponed rather than cancelled. Mongezi, we only work with in a sort of very partial capacity. I think he's represented by SMAC, but we work with a lithography studio in France who he works with. So from time to time, we sell some of his prints. So I can't speak much to the Triennale, but with regards to some of the other things that we had planned and signed up for, yes, there's been quite a lot of interruption. But I do think I don't see it as all bad. I think we also have to remember that for a lot of us in the art world, there's always a huge amount of pressure to go, and I think it's been quite valuable, especially during the hard lockdown, just to take a moment to take stock, reflect, not have so much pressure to travel and produce and install and do all this stuff. That's not to say we haven't been busy. Absolutely, we still have been, but I think we've had a chance to think about things in a bit of a different way. And I think for some artists, while for some of them lockdown's been really tough, and some people have struggled with mental health issues, for example, and other welfare issues, I think for some of them it's been a very positive experience because they've actually just been able to spend more time in the studio to focus and not have so many other competing demands on their time.
So to Charl and Julie, have in your studio visits, your virtual studio visits, have you, because part of being a dealer is also being a conversationalist with your artist, being a kind of editor, a curator, a compassionate voice. Have you encountered artists who are trying to make the great COVID artwork that you've maybe had to tell them, hang on? Charl?
No.
Yeah, I didn't, although there was one piece that
You don't
I
have to
saw.
say who,
No, it's okay, I won't. But where the mask was pulled over Cyril Ramaphosa's head, and I thought that summed up the situation well, not in terms of him, but just in terms of the whole world and their experience, their fumbling with this unknown thing, you know. So but then another one, interestingly enough, is I work with an artist with the name of Norman O'Flynn, and he's been painting portraits with people with masks for about 5 years now. And all of a sudden this became relevant. And I did an online exhibition with him during the COVID period, and I wasn't sure whether this was a good idea. I thought most people would probably find a bit passé or whatever. But interestingly enough, it sold really, really well. So you're asking about the COVID piece, and then whether, you know, that, I don't know, there's an interesting connection there. But to answer your question directly, no.
Okay. I want to...
I do think that the pandemic has made us reinterpret some of the work that some artists are doing differently. You know, Anne Gollifer, for example, is one of the artists I work with, and she had been thinking a lot about sort of hybrid states between sort of humans and animals. And of course, you know, having a zoonotic, a disease of zoonotic origin in the form of COVID has, you know, made us think in new ways about sort of her concepts. But that's a slight aside.
I want to perhaps darken the tone a little bit, but it was something that was suggested by Lerato. You know, the COVID experience, people have had to grit and go through it, but it's also exposed structural weaknesses globally. That's what pandemics do. If anyone's interested, there's a medical historian, Frank Snowden, who published a book serendipitously called Epidemics and Society. And it looks at the long millennial history of pandemics and how they expose structural weaknesses. But a question based on that very flighty preamble, what have you seen and learnt about inequalities in the art world during this period, especially in Southern Africa? And since Lerato, you, I guess, prodded me to think along that line, I'll put the question to you first.
Just to start off with, so I was living in the US, and 2-3 years ago, I was deciding that I wanted to come back home, and I had come, I mean, the African continent, and there were various countries that I was looking at, and few of the reasons or things that I was looking at was political stability, safety and security, corruption, so things like sovereign credit rating, state inflation, taxation, all those things. And Mauritius and Botswana were at the top for me in terms of setting up a business and settling. I ended up going with Botswana because obviously I'm from there. And COVID, I am of privilege. So even though I am Black and a woman, I do come from quite a privileged situation. And what we've seen in a country that is a social welfare state like Botswana has been the remarkable galvanizing of resources. So our foreign reserves have been galvanized to, or have been dispersed to support quite a lot of people. So a lot of people received food packages from the government. Artists received grants from the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture. Granted, we can do that because we have a small population. But for me, living in Botswana, the very fundamental reasons of why I chose to start a business and why I chose to come back home specifically to Botswana remain more true, particularly during a pandemic, as opposed to maybe moving to areas that have greater markets like your South Africa or Nigeria. Not to say those countries are going through a crappy time, but the reasons why I decided to move to Botswana and stay here because of the social welfare state of it.
So would you say that it affirmed the social contract in?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I could go on and on and on about the various things that the Botswana government have been doing, but and things could be better, certainly. But comparing it to other countries, I was saying, a colleague of mine in Mauritius was saying the same thing, that it's just better having access to credit because of various policies that the government have developed in this country during the time of the pandemic.
Julie?
Look, I think the intersection of the Black Lives Matter movement globally and the art world also globally, but especially in the US, has led to a lot of very important discussions and conversations and debates which are ongoing. So I think and many of those things have been long overdue. So I think it's been a very important time to have those conversations, and also to think about how these structural inequalities are mirrored across different countries. You know, that there are parallels between many of our situations, even though our countries don't have exactly the same histories. So yeah, there've been a lot of important debates going on around museums in the US, for example, discussions about representation, about hiring, and of course many of those are pertinent to South Africa. And there are, I think we all know that there are so many inequalities on a lot of different levels. In terms of just going to consider Lerato's insights on sort of state support, I think artists, more broadly speaking, not just visual artists, but in theatre, in music, the performing arts, I think it's obviously a really challenging time, much more so for performing arts at the moment, and for musicians. And I don't think the state has stepped up as much as it should have. But those are just some preliminary thoughts.
Charl?
Yes, it was interesting. You know, I, for instance, I applied for a grant to help pay the salary that I'm paying, and it was quite easy to get that. And FNB that I bank with, they also called me at one point and said, look, we can give you this and that if you want it. It was a loan, but still it was available. And that social inequalities we're talking about, I don't know if many artists or people, you know, in that sort of situation had that, had the privilege of getting that offered to them. So it showed, and I hope it made people think in many ways. So let's see.
And we are almost time up. I'm just going to quickly scroll through the chats. I think we've actually addressed most of them. Two that seem to share a similar theme. Questions relate to how have online sales been during COVID? And then I suppose extending on that, how do you feel about online sales versus a physical presence? Physical selling, I suppose. Julie?
Yeah, I think I've commented on this briefly already, but online sales have actually gone really well for us
frozen.
overall.
Charl, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It was actually surprisingly good the last few months, and I'm really fortunate to be able to say that. The other question, I think, was, will it replace? No, I don't think so. I think we've covered that. It's unlikely that it will replace the actual tangible experience.
I'm not sure if you can hear me again now, Charl. But yeah, I think our experience has been similar to yours. It's sales have been very positive, and whilst one is never going to have a full experience of an artwork online, what I'm finding is that, and this has been the case over the years, is that people usually love the artwork even more when they see it in the flesh when it arrives. So they like it online, or they might even love it online, but they love it even more when they see it. I've never had a case where someone has received an artwork and been like, "Oh no, this is not as good as it was online." It's always the other way around. So yeah, I think the physical experience is always the best ultimately, but I think that hybrid models and our online tools are super important. And yeah, I think it will be a set of hybrid models going forward. I think we will take some things forward from this year. I'm sure Lerato, Charl, you agree that there are some things that we'll take forward. There are also some things we'll probably happily forget or try to forget. But yeah, I think Sean has frozen, so he's asking. Oh no, he's back. I think he's asking us to wrap up. Sean, are you there? Okay, I think he's still out of the room.
I'm back, yeah.
Oh, you're back. Okay, over to you.
To conclude?
Yes, sorry, yes.
Okay, I feel like I missed the last chapter of War and Peace. I had a question, which maybe it answers in all of these. How much of this improvisation is sustainable? How much of what we are doing now will still be a feature of the art world in 2022? I hope some of the proximity, improvisation, honesty, and also being able to attend meetings barefoot whilst the upper half looks very presentable will continue. But, you know, I really do think the experience of art is not only visual. It's haptic and it's embodied. And by that I mean that we do more than look with the eyes. I think we experience art as a fully sensual thing. And that is important to remember, because I think if we reduce art to merely a flattened image, we are going to transition to a different type of business function, which is selling JPEGs, selling PDFs. Those are legitimate. You know, the Guggenheim a few years ago did a fantastic initiative, which was to present an exhibition of what were functionally interesting YouTube works. You know, works that were created specifically for online. And the online world is an ecology. It's rich in experience, and I value it for that. I mean, this conversation, I don't think would have happened were we in the orthodox physical space, because there was a different vetting system. So, you know, hierarchies are being challenged. But at the same time, you know, one of the questions from the audience was, where does the artist fit into this conversation? And where does the artist fit, and where does the art object fit? And the art object isn't really, you know, it's not just painting and sculpture anymore, but, you know, it's an embodied experience that isn't reduced to screen time. That's my soliloquy. I sound like one of those American Presbyterian news presenters. If I could ask the three of you to answer that, how much of this improvisation is sustainable? And it'll also be your note to say farewell. I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to listen in silence and pleasure. Thank you for entertaining me, even though I've dipped in and out. So, Lerato, please.
I think we tend to look at things in terms of black and white, right or wrong, but there's those beautiful sweet spots in the middle, the gray, that is important. So there's space for both. There's space for digital and physical, and I hope going forward we look at the sweet spots as opposed to the polarity, the binary of let's keep this, let's take this, or let's do this, let's do that. There's space for both things, digital and physical. I love the physical. I think it's important. I've been attending Turbine for 5 years and I love it. The digital was great, but I wish we have both.
You're the best ambassador Turbine could ask for. Julie?
I agree with Lerato. I mean, of course, we're not going to be doing as many Zoom calls and whatever else, you know, in the coming years. But I do think that there's a strong chance that when I have exhibition openings next year, that there will be an online element for people who want to participate from around the world. And I think a lot of us are wondering why we didn't do more of that sooner. I think we just assumed that, you know, a physical exhibition couldn't somehow be communicated in other ways. And whilst it certainly can't be replicated online, there can still be a channel in, and people can still gain value from that, and they can learn. And they might not have the full experience, but they can certainly learn and grow their understanding about an artist or an artwork. So yeah, I think there'll definitely be things that we take forward into the coming years. Not everything, but I do think that hybrid models are the future. And yeah, thanks to everyone for tonight's discussion. Looking forward to continuing the conversation offline as well. Over to you, Charl.
Yes, I agree with both of you. It's there to stay. Most of what we've done that is new. It's like new arrows in our quivers, and we'll use them in the future. I mean, a good example is the fact that I'm doing a group exhibition at my gallery on Thursday night, but that show will also be featured online, just as one small element. So that's the way we're going, and I think it's exciting. It suits me. And on the note from me as well, thank you everybody for making this possible, and it was fun.
Thanks to all three of you. Stay small, stay independent, keep on trucking. To Turbine Art Fair, thank you very much, and for the participants, particularly the people who checked into the chat room and also helped steer the conversation. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. Okay, we can evaporate. Goodbye.